Israel found a Hamas rocket launcher inside of a children's facility. Al-Jazeera pushed back on the claim that Hamas has tunnels under hospitals, and a U.S. representative is censured over their comments on the war. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 8:30 a.m. Central on Wednesday, November 8th, 2023. Overnight, Israel stepped up their attacks against Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, and Israel says that their strikes in Gaza resulted in the elimination of Mohsen Abu Zina, who they say specialized in the production of ammunition and rockets for Hamas. Now, on the bright side, there haven't been any claimed Israeli strikes inside of Syrian territory in quite a while. That was one of the potential paths to escalation. Wouldn't read too much into that quite yet. Wouldn't get too optimistic that this thing isn't going to spiral out of control, but, find the good news where we can. Israel put out a couple videos that I thought were worth walking through here, showing kind of what they're encountering in terms of Hamas fighting positions as they move through Gaza. The first one here shows Israeli forces in a scout building for children, like Boy Scouts type thing. You can see some of the paintings on the wall here. And when the camera turns over, you can see that there is a fixed rocket firing point in the corner. So it's kind of under the overhang, so aircraft overhead wouldn't be able to see this. And then after the rockets are fired, again, aircraft overhead, all they would see is the building. They wouldn't actually see the launchers. Now, it's interesting because usually when an insurgent group is firing something like rockets or mortars, they want it to be mobile because they're going to fire that and they're going to have to get out of there before aircraft or ISR overhead identifies their location and strikes it. But in this case, it looks like Hamas was pretty confident that the location wouldn't be hit, maybe because it was a children's facility, right? So these are kind of modified fixed rocket launchers uncovered by Israel. Israel also put out a video showing a tunnel entrance that they say was uncovered near a Ferris wheel playground type area. Not surprising that Hamas has tunnels. That's not really up for debate. I mean, at this point, Hamas, Israel has been in those tunnels in past conflicts. Hamas talks about the tunnels and how they use them. They've even put out videos showing their fighters moving through and popping out of the tunnels to engage Israeli forces. So the existence of tunnels is not really in question. The location of where these tunnels are and the access points is going to be a major point of contention moving forward in this conflict. And on that note, Al-Jazeera pushed back against a recent Israeli claim about a tunnel network with the entrance right next to a hospital. And we talked about this in a recent video showing the Israeli footage. There's very clearly a hole in the ground, entrance to something. Israel says that this was part of a larger Hamas tunnel network, military facilities in and around the hospital, located there likely as a protected structure, so it wouldn't be hit by Israeli forces. Now, it's worth noting that Al Jazeera is not entirely an independent third party here, right? So I wouldn't necessarily call Al Jazeera pro-Hamas. I think that's a little bit far, but they're certainly pro-Palestinian and really push back on Israel across the board and have for quite a while. So it's better getting something from Al Jazeera than directly from Hamas. But, in this case, they're definitely presenting the other side of the argument than Israel is. Now, in their digital investigation, they say that, yes, this tunnel exists. This entrance exists, but it was the hatch for a water reservoir. And they say they interacted with some people that helped build the facility, looked at the plans, things like that. I just want to say that this is what we're going to get going forward in this war. And neither side is presenting the actual piece of information that we need, right? We need to know, was that hole in the ground being used for military purposes? Were there IEDs stacked along the walls? Were there RPGs being stored down there? Did it connect to other tunnels where Hamas would pop out and fire rockets? Neither side really addressed that. This is just going to be constant. And to be fair, the argument that this was originally built as a hatch for a water reservoir could be true, but that doesn't mean that it was never or could never be used in a military capacity. Now, the contentious point here isn't that tunnels exist. It's the location of the tunnels under protected structures like schools, hospitals, mosques, things like that. And we've seen them before, right? So it is a known thing that Hamas does that. I think what Israel is going to have to do going forward as they move through Gaza is just very clearly document the next one they come by, right? So whether it's under a hospital or mosque, whatever it might be, cameras rolling from the start, show the entrances and the exits, show the tunnels connected underneath, show the weapons that are being stored there underneath. I think it's going to take that level of documentation, like live footage documentation, to really at least get more people on board recognizing that that is how Hamas operates. Now, shifting outside of Gaza for a minute, Khaled Mashal, the head of the Islamic resistance movement abroad, in a recent interview said, quote, the Al-Qassam brigades, that's the militant arm of Hamas, is managing the battle intelligently and are preparing for a long war. With the exception of displacement, surrender, or the release of all prisoners, we will make any concessions to stop the genocide in Gaza. So directly contradictory to what Netanyahu's saying, right? We covered yesterday how Netanyahu said, no ceasefire. There's no negotiations to be had until the hostages are released. He's not necessarily a spokesperson for Hamas, but he's a senior figure in Hamas abroad. Mashal here saying, we'll do anything to stop this, but not the hostages. He added, quote, Iran has supported us with money, expertise, and weapons, and I can only say thank you. This does not mean we agree with all of its agenda. This is something that we saw similarly voiced by Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader, last week during his speech. And it's interesting. You're starting to see some of this from some of these Iranian-backed groups. There's been, again, I think there's been so much of a push to say that these groups are going to do exactly what Iran says when Iran says to do it. And I think there's a little bit of a push for autonomy here, both from Hezbollah last week and Hamas now, saying, yes, they're our allies. Iran is our friend. They've helped us to get to where we are today, and we're grateful. But we are still enacting our own agenda. So you can kind of understand it from the point of view of some of these proxies, not wanting to be viewed as, entirely subservient to everything that Iran puts out. Now, shifting over to the United Nations Security Council, which continues to not get anything done as it relates to this war. They failed once more to agree on a resolution around the Israeli-Hamas war. The sticking point right now, it seems, is the U.S. was calling for humanitarian pauses, whereas others were demanding a humanitarian ceasefire. Think about that for a second. That's where the United Nations is right now, is we're arguing over terms like pause or ceasefire. Now, it's worth noting that a couple weeks ago, there were some resolutions put forward, and one of the things the United States was really pushing back on was, again, this term ceasefire. But if you look at where the two sides here, if you will, in the Security Council have shifted, it does seem like the United States stance is shifting more towards that ceasefire language. That wasn't even in the conversation. The term humanitarian pause wasn't even in the conversation just a couple weeks ago, and now that's kind of where the United States is digging in. Additionally, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, quote, Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. Hundreds of girls and boys are reportedly being killed or injured every day. This led to Israel's UN ambassador calling for Guterres to resign. There's been some tension over his past statements, and one of the sticking points right now is that Guterres is focusing more on a ceasefire and not outright calling for Hamas to surrender and to return all of the hostages. And he's come under some fire historically, just over the past past month, I guess it is now, in this conflict, where Guterres has really towed this line, kind of suggesting but not outright saying that Israel is committing war crimes. In late October, he said, quote, I'm deeply concerned about the clear violations of international humanitarian law that we are witnessing in Gaza. Let me be clear, no party to an armed conflict is above international humanitarian law. Again, you're kind of looking at this diplomatic speak, right? It's vague and calling people out, and you got to read between the lines, but the problem that Israel has with this is there's not enough UN language condemning Hamas and saying this terrorist organization, they carried out this massacre, let's focus on getting rid of them. And to that end, Israel's foreign minister Eli Cohen stated, quote, Hamas is the problem in Gaza, not Israel's actions to eliminate this terrorist organization. Now, shifting south to Yemen, the Houthis held a graduation ceremony a couple days ago. This was put out by Aaron Zellen on Twitter. Great resource when it comes to understanding international terrorism. And in this graduation ceremony, the new Houthi fighters were marching over U.S. and Israeli flags, which is kind of right in line with their motto. Talked about this before, but I feel like it's under the radar. The Houthi motto, death to America, death to Israel, curse the Jews, and victory to Islam. So in case there's any question on where they stand, who they support, and who they hate, it's right there in the open. Now, yesterday, the Houthis announced they had carried out an additional attack on Israel. It's not clear if this actually happened. Nobody talked about shooting down incoming missiles. Israel's right on kind of the max range of what Yemen would be able, or what the Houthis would be able to range. So maybe they didn't reach their target, or maybe they weren't launched at all. But either way, it's not likely that any of these missiles would actually do any real damage to Israel. Again, max range, they're going to have to overfly not just Israeli air defenses, but U.S. air defenses on some of our ships there in the Red Sea. Just a lot for those missiles to try to get through. So the argument here that I've seen put forward is not necessarily that the Houthis are trying to destroy Israel, even though that's right in their motto, but that they're trying to show the international community that their organization is still a force to be reckoned with and to potentially embarrass Saudi Arabia, who is on the verge of normalizing relations with Israel. Now, stepping back a little bit to look at just the tragic situation in Yemen right now, you've really got two sides here. The Houthis are backed by Iran, and then you've got the Republic of Yemen government, which is backed by Saudi Arabia. Now, those two sides have been fighting a civil war since 2014, but it's largely died down. There's been a lot of movement as of late towards a peace deal. So the Houthis striking out here, and it's notable, right? They're not striking U.S. targets in the Middle East, which are closer in a lot of ways. They're striking directly at Israel. This could be their way of saying, take us seriously, we're legitimate, and we've still got a lot of fight left. Of course, the downside here, which I think is pretty obvious, is as the Houthis are carrying out these strikes across the Red Sea, trying to hit Israel, they're bypassing American ships. And for every one of those missiles and drones being shot down, it's not crazy to see the next step being the United States conducting retaliatory strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. Or maybe we don't get directly involved at all, but decide to relook our substantial military aid to Saudi Arabia and increase what we're providing them as they continue their fight with the Houthis. Now, shifting back to U.S. domestic politics related to the ongoing war in Israel, Congressperson Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat, was censured with a vote of 234 to 188, with 4 Republicans voting against and 22 Democrats voting for. This was centered around her use of the term, quote, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which the Anti-Defamation League refers to as an anti-Semitic slogan. So Tlaib responded to that, saying that her use of the phrase was, quote, "an aspirational call for freedom, human rights, and peaceful coexistence, not death, destruction, or hate." Now, the reason I bring this up is just to show how emotionally charged this war is in the United States. Now, unfortunately, we've got a major war raging in Europe right now between Ukraine and Russia, so we have something to compare this to. And it just, I could be wrong, let me know, but I don't remember U.S. politicians being censored by each other for statements on that war. Again, maybe I missed it, maybe I don't remember it, but there were also not these large-scale rallies that we're seeing around the world, but kind of focused here in the United States. I just don't remember these at any point during the war. Even the very early days when U.S. support for Ukraine was through the roof, there weren't these massive rallies. There were protests, but some of these groups, I've seen the pictures. I don't think that 500,000 is accurate, like some of them called out, but tens of thousands certainly. And they're ongoing. They've been going nonstop for the last month. Most of what I've seen coming out of these rallies are people calling for a ceasefire. Tends to be the theme, which, in that sense, I think you could say that what we've seen in the last month are some of the largest anti-war rallies across the United States since, the deadliest days of the Iraq War. I don't know if this is enough to lead to any sort of policy changes. I mean, look, Congress across the board, across party lines, really is pretty lockstep with Israel and has been for some time. But, the size and the frequency of these rallies, it's notable. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack. Link is in the description below. 7 to 10 of the top stories each week, along with a few podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.